Hello, everybody. Are you all okay? So, for the next talk, I'm happy to introduce to you Angie Born. She's been doing UX and research for 15 years as a consultant in both Switzerland and Australia, and also as the head of product for Scope. It is a content marketing startup. And she has interviewed and observed thousands of users, built hundreds of solutions, products, and systems, and all of that with a mix of evidence and empathy. And more recently, she decided to leave Scope and to share what she learned and become a UX lecturer at the Lucerne University. And most importantly, to be here with us today. So please, welcome Angie.
Thank you, and hi, everyone. I first need to know my audience, so I need a bit of a show of hands of who has done research before. Okay, well, good. Okay, so who's kind of at least intending to go out and talk to their customers? Like, have some good intentions? Okay, very good, because this talk is definitely for both of you, these groups, people who want to talk to customers. And in my years of research, I've had a lot of exposure to people who were telling me really, really interesting facts, really, really interesting insights, but they were also telling me a lot of lies. And I was always wondering, why are they not telling the truth? Sometimes very blatantly, sometimes a bit more subtly, but it was just astonishing. And so I went into this topic maybe 6, 7 years ago. I really started researching into why people actually lie to you. And so this is the result of my research and also a lot of examples from the work I've done before. So why do people lie to you? Because they want to feel good about themselves, which officially gives you the answer, and you guys can all go home. Just kidding. Of course, I have a lot more material for you guys. And so what I have is I have a few examples, and I have a few stories for you to tell. So the first story is about my niece. My niece plays soccer, and the other day I had to drop her off at a tournament, and I couldn't find a parking spot. And so my little niece, I had to kind of drop her off at the opposite entrance or opposite side of the pitch. And I asked her, do you find your way here? You've been here before, right? And she's like, yeah, I know this venue. I know where to go. And so I dropped her off, parked my car, came back, and there she stood crying. And I was like, what happened? I thought you knew the way to the entrance. And she's like, I knew the way. I was just kind of waiting around for a bit. I was like, okay, so we start walking. I was like, look here, we just have to turn right. He's like, yeah, I knew we had to turn right. But do you see this tree here? Like, I came here, and my friend Emma says this tree is super dangerous. Like, one time we even walked under a tree like this, and the branches fell down. I was like, oh, okay, well, we don't want the branches to fall down, so we did a little detour around the tree and kept walking. And then she kept coming up with all these other stories about why she didn't go further, or she actually said, yeah, I came this far, but she always had a little excuse of why she didn't turn that corner or do that. And then my favorite bit was as we walked past the change rooms. So they looked a bit like this, these high windows. And she said, yeah, I came here, but actually this was the entrance last time. And I was like, did they rebuild something? This doesn't look rebuilt. And she said, no, my dad and we actually climbed through these windows to get in, because you get straight into the change rooms here. I was like, okay. Now, her dad brings about 3 digits to his scale. He's not the type of guy who would kind of climb these windows. So obviously, there was just another small little excuse of, because she was just embarrassed to tell me that she didn't find the way. And so we had a happy ending to the story. Everything went fine because we found the entrance. She played, she had a great day, and everyone was happy. Now, the problem that we had here was something that I've seen not just in little kids, but I've seen it again and again in research. It's something where I find a lot of times we've kind of become a bit smarter in how we tell these lies, but the patterns are often very, very similar to what we've just seen in Valerie. And so what I wanted to do is, today I want to talk to you about how we deceive ourselves, because this is really what it is about. It's about how we kind of lie to ourselves in the first place before we actually say something to someone else. And the second part will be about what we can do about it. So let's go a bit into these kind of biases and things at play when we talk to other people. So the first concept I want to talk to you about, maybe some of you are familiar, is cognitive dissonance. A very, very important concept to understand because it's kind of the root of a lot of things that happen. So let's say you have pirated a TV show. And that could just be you've kind of borrowed the login of like the Netflix login of a friend. But let's say you kind of obtained it, not through super legal ways, and you watch the show. Now, you have two options now. You can go down the path of the unhappy pirate. You can be an unhappy pirate that says, I'm a terrible person. I stole content. These poor artists that made this are not going to profit from what I did. I stole it. I feel bad. Or what you can do is you can go down the path of the happy pirate. And that's what most of us do. You find a lot of excuses. You say, well, you know what, the show wasn't even available in my country yet. All my friends in the US are already talking about the latest episode. I really wanted to watch it. I'm on all these Facebook groups, and I really want to kind of be involved in the discussion. Or you can say, these people earn enough anyway. There's no point that I also need to pay for it. So there's a lot of reasons we can come up with, and we become super, super creative about finding reasons why we did something and kind of justifying ourselves. So what we often say is that kind of everyone has this great superpower. We're all superheroes, and our superpower is self-justification. We're very, very good at this. We've become better and better. We practice throughout life. As you can see, we start very early on as a little kid, and we practice through life to make sure people don't understand or don't see it, but also just for ourselves, because we then can feel much, much better about a lot of decisions that we've made. And that's really what cognitive dissonance is about. We kind of get further and further removed on that pyramid from that other option of actually feeling bad about it. The further down we go, the further we remove ourselves to actually accept that it was maybe also a bit of a bad thing that we did. And the way that this relates to my research, or what I've seen in my research, is that people do this all the time, and this is sometimes quite subtle. There are other biases that are much more obvious, I hope. With a bit of training, we can actually all spot this. And one is this kind of averaging bias that we do. And averaging works in a way that we say we have this idea of who we want to be, and we kind of average our answers out to that idea. So let me explain. We did a study at a casino for a gambling prevention program. And people came in. They were all members of the loyalty card of that casino. So we had their members' data. We knew how often they were at the casino because we had the access data of whenever they put their little card into a slot. And what happened is that we recruited users specifically for certain frequency patterns. So we wanted some that were there every single day, and we wanted some that were there like every second or third day at the casino because, as I said, this was a gambling prevention program. So we asked these people as kind of a warm-up question before we did our activities, how often they came to the casino. And you can guess what happened. Most of them said, yeah, maybe 2 to 3 times a week, even though we knew from the member data they were there every day. So you can see how a lot of times it wasn't even about them wanting to feel good towards us, but mostly it was about them not wanting to admit to themselves that they probably had a gambling problem. And so what we did is we obviously then often compared this, and we had to kind of then took the data in a certain way. But it was very, very interesting to see because we had kind of that black and white proof of how this happened. Now, averaging also works the other way. Any gym goers in the room? Come on, proud hands up here. Oh, a few, okay, not a lot. Okay, guys, you can still bear with me with this story. So averaging works the other way around too. Now, if I ask you, how often do you go to the gym? You will probably tell me whatever it is, maybe 2, maybe 3 times a week would be a nice way to do it. And what happened in our study is, again, we had the member data. Entries every time they went, and we did the study with them, where we could then obviously secretly compare afterwards, just to verify our numbers. And what happened is that obviously people told they go to the gym way more often than the membership data actually showed us. And so either they kind of secretly snuck into the gym at night, or they probably just felt better about it. And what was interesting is that we did some studies around with people where we saw that when, for example, they had just gone through the gym 3 times last week, and by the way, we all do that. If they had just been there last week 3 times, but the weeks before they were just once or twice, the 3 times becomes their average. That is their normal now. And so when you ask them, they will say, yeah, I go to the gym 3 times a week. And they're not even lying. They just went 3 times last week, so great. And that's probably who they want to be. That's how often they want to go in the future. So you can't even really say, well, they're blatantly lying to you, because that's what they are intending to do in the future. So it's a bit difficult to kind of draw the line of where they are lying. So this is, as I said, called the averaging bias, where we could kind of show that and reveal it by having the actual member data. Now you could say, well, great, let's just only rely on stats. Let's just forget about asking people. Let's just measure data and get into the analytics and just do quant. Because with quant, we kind of get that true picture. The problem here is that I hope you've heard of this concept that quantitative data gives you the what people do. Qualitative data gives you the why people do something. So we need to go out and talk to people in order to understand why they actually do something. And that is what a lot of people are doing with user research, with usability testing. But what's also interesting is that even there is a little caveat, because sometimes you can't just ask people why they do something. So this is a study that a Swedish researcher did a few years ago, where he showed people 2 faces, and he got them to pick one face. So you would say, which one do you like better, straight hair or curly hair? And the person would pick curly hair. So what he did is he took the pictures, he secretly swapped them, he showed him straight hair and asked, so why did you pick this one? And what's interesting is only 1/3 of these mix-ups were actually detected. People launched into an explanation of why they actually picked that person that they never had picked in the first place. So you could think, well, that's kind of low involvement, it's just a study with faces, no one cares. He actually replicated these results with a study around political opinions, where people had to fill in surveys about where they stand on political ideas, where they are with like just some tough questions around where they stand politically. And again, he secretly swapped their answers to then discuss the answers with them. And again, people didn't notice that swap and started to launch into explanations why they did something. So that is where it becomes super tricky and super dangerous to just simply rely on that. Now, I don't want to discourage you. I promised you I also have tips and stuff we can actually do about this, so I don't want to leave you on this sad note about what all the caveats are. And we can go into what we can actually do about it. And the first thing I have is, now comes the big academic moment. This is a model from 1975. Apologies for that, but I just really love this model. And what it does, it kind of explains a lot about how we actually work and shape behavior. So one is that we have our social and subjective norms and our attitudes. Now, I was told that in French, attitude actually is not translated, or you shouldn't take the literal translation of attitude, because this is really not about behavior, but about your point of view. So the English meaning of kind of what is your point of view towards something, what is kind of how you feel about something. And so the attitude is your personal way of, for example, saying, I want to live a healthy life. I think it's very good if people don't gamble. So that is can be my personal attitude. The social and subjective norms is kind of one should be healthy, one should not gamble. So it's kind of that generalization of what is normal it's mainly in my culture, but also kind of in my families and friends. So kind of think about it as what is normal. So how do I feel about something and what is normal? That shapes behavior intention. So that actually is the grounding pillars to how we then want to behave. Now, I emphasize want to behave because now comes the big step. There's another box, and the next box is actual behavior. And the problem here is that everyone who's ever tried to stop smoking knows exactly the difference between those two boxes. Like, you want to do something, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're actually going to do it. And that's not necessarily you. And so what I always suggest you do is when you do interviews, when you do surveys, when you talk to people, you focus on this. And you take it as this. You don't ask about their actual behavior. You ask questions about their behavior intention. And only when you want to see their behavior, then you can go through other methodologies. For example, you can go to usability tests, you can go to observations, and you can really look at how people are using things, and that gives you the true pictures. By the way, analytics also belongs into that box, obviously. You want to see what people are actually doing, not what they're intending to do, as a big difference. So that's the first kind of tip that I really encourage you to do, to really differentiate between this idea of behavior intention and behavior. Now, the next thing is about interfaces. And that is that you don't let your users hide behind a bad interface. What do I mean by that? So we've done a study with a medical device. You can see this in the background here. This is a device that lets you process tissue. Anyone who's ever had a biopsy, your tissue probably went through one of these devices. It's one of a 7-step process. Your tissue that gets cut out of your body gets put into this machine. You can guess it's very important that this machine is used properly. And we had a client, the manufacturer of this machine, who said, we have so much unintended behavior, we don't know why. Because they've done the analytics on it, they've done the voice of customer programs. And so what we did is we went in to observe people. In one of the crucial steps of the process, the person that's operating this machine is asked to change a bottle. So you can see those bottles there. They're full of reagents, and sometimes the reagents is not pure enough anymore, so the person gets asked to change the bottle. Now, I know you're not specialists in this area, but imagine this dialogue. Now, also imagine it's 2 o'clock in the morning, because that's a lot of times when you get asked to do this. And imagine that the reagent cupboard is like 2 doors down, or maybe even in another building, and you have to go there to actually refill this reagent. So what are you going to press? If I tell you that the button that is called changed is just going to magically make the machine run again, you're probably going to press that button. Because, what does it actually want from me? So even trained users who kind of had an idea what this was supposed to be, who were probably knew about what happened afterwards, would often press that button. Some of them in our studies would even be like, oh yeah, whatever, yeah, just change. Then I know it's gonna work again. And this is obviously super dangerous. Now, imagine that's your biopsy that's in this machine. A lot of times it gets destroyed. And so that was really the crucial moment where we had a problem that we needed to solve. And what we did is we had obviously lots of different ideas and different changes. But one thing we did that really was very effective is that we just changed this dialogue. Like, we changed a few other things around it as well, but we changed this dialogue to this. Same options, the question is phrased differently. And all of a sudden, in our next test, so this was the prototype, that's why it's all kind of black and white and funny. All of a sudden, in the tests, people were a lot of times clicking the right buttons. The ones that were lying to the machine were now actively lying to the machine. So they were saying, oh, I'm just going to say I changed the entire bottle because then I know it's going to run, but I'm going to write a note. I'm going to kind of started to feel bad about having lied because now they actively lied. They had no excuse anymore to actually say, well, I didn't really know what it wanted from me, because it was very clear what the machine now wanted from them. So it is a simple text change. It required a lot of discussions with the engineers. I'm not going to make this like a super happy story. It was a lot of discussions with the engineers who were all like, no, this needs to be more accurate and we need to say this, but it really worked. So the behavior started to change and we could actually get people, just because they couldn't hide behind that unclarity anymore, we could actually get them to display the right behavior and to actually use the machine properly. And so that was, it looks like a very simple change. In real life, it's a lot of times, it means a lot of discussions, a lot of studies, a lot of tests again, to kind of prove that this works. The great thing was that once we could establish that these type of patterns work, is that we could actually apply it in other areas of this project and of this prototype as well. Because we just needed that first initial proof that this is actually a thing, and this is one of the reasons why people didn't use the machine properly. So that's my second tip. Now we get to the next one, and the next one is really about when you can't go out and do these big studies. Sometimes we rely on surveys. Sometimes we don't have the budget, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the skill to go out and do big observations and user studies. So we rely on what people tell us in surveys. And what I would really encourage you to do when it comes to surveys is consider a few things. So first of all, we just heard it in the keynote before as well, NPS. Consider NPS fatigue. How many times do we now go into a shop, just bought a new phone, and then I get asked these questions? How was it? How was the assistant? How was the conversation on the phone? How was the light in the shop? How was the assistant dressed? Was it all great? And you have to yeah, everything was great or not. Or you just have to answer so many things. Every airport toilet now lets you give feedback about how it was. So there is a bit of fatigue in that, and you need to take that into account when you ask your question as well, because you're just a fraction of the thousands of surveys that people actually fill in. And what makes it even worse is that my next tip now is to say, allow for a lot more complexity in your surveys than what you would generally do. So, for example, instead of just letting people answer yes and no, because that's the categories you're interested in, give them more categories for certain questions. So we had, we're just running something now where we are trying to encourage girls to get into STEM. And so what we did is we talked to a lot of teachers. We gave them material to advertise math and physics classes. And so what we wanted to see if the girls actually noticed that, or if the girls were even told that by the teacher that they have this opportunity. So were they shown the flyers? Were they shown the material? And so what we did is instead of just asking them, hey, did your teacher tell you about these opportunities? Yes, no. We initially did we asked 3-4 girls directly, and then we got those nuanced answers out. So we got some people saying, yeah, I think they did something, but they just kind of put it in a corner. Or they said, yeah, they did. They ran a whole session on it. So that was a clear yes. And then some were like, oh, no, I don't really remember. They might have said something, but you know what? The teacher says so many things all day. I have no idea. So that would be a no. Or maybe it would still be a yes, because we actually don't know. And so we started to design the survey, we designed the survey so that it's not just yes and no, but it's all these nuances. So all of a sudden you have 5 or 6 answers that are possible. But what we can do afterwards is we can then say, which ones do we count as a yes, and which ones do we count as a no? We can make this analysis ourselves, but what we give the user is the option that they actually recognize themselves in. So the stuff that they know, yeah, this is actually what I wanted to say. And that can really help. Now, what it does, it makes your surveys longer, which is something everyone always said, no, keep it short, keep it short. But I would rather have a few questions like this where you know you get the true answer and you get real data out of it, valid data out of it, rather than having a longer survey. If you can scrap questions, but do the questions right that are in it. And plus, a lot of times people actually do love it when they have that option that they were just looking for, or that they have in their head, or at least something that resembles them. Because there's nothing worse than if you're made to choose something and your option is not there, but you have to click one. And so in a lot of surveys, that's still the case. And so what we really recommend, or what I recommend, is that you can pre-test this. You just show it to 2 or 3 people and see if they understand the options. But it gives you a much, much more accurate picture. Because one thing we learned is that there's this joke that surveys only get filled in by psychology students and market researchers. And so we want to make sure that the people who are not, because probably that's not always our target market, and we can actually get a bit of a broader range of answers. So generally, as I said, I think allowing for the complexity can really help you with finding valid data rather than just little clicks. Another little anecdote is that I've looked into survey behavior, like how people fit in surveys, and people even admit it. Some of them said, oh yeah, when the survey gets too long, I start to do these patterns. Like I just go, like option 4 and option 3, it always looks so nice on the page. It's like, what the hell? Like we've put so much effort into this, and we're making decisions based on these answers after. And they're just, yeah, it's not their project. What do they care? So we really need to be careful with that. Another phenomenon, by the way, is when you have a rating out of 5, some people just never give more than a 4, no matter how great it was. Like they can have been treated like a queen, the experience was a 4. It's like, but what else do you want? They can't even tell you what else they want. They just give you a 4. And so that can be very frustrating. Now you can say, well, they're outliers, but we've actually seen it quite a bit, that behavior. So just be careful and make sure that you put a lot of thought into this so that you actually get the valid data out. It's much more valuable than actually just having higher bar charts. I know some people just want the high bar charts, but it's much, much more valuable when you can, especially when you then like depend on this for your next decision making. The other thing having to do with survey is that what I sometimes see is that people go way too far into the future. What would you do if? How much would you pay? But if we had finished this, now if this product had this feature, would you actually like it? A lot of times people can't answer these questions that kind of are these hypothetical questions in the future. Nor can they answer the questions that are lying too far in the past. I can't give you an exact timeline. It depends on your. Sometimes the past is yesterday, and sometimes the past is what happened 2 weeks ago. So it really depends on your context. But think about like what is probably too long ago, and especially if people start to answer things. That start to give you funny answers, they probably don't remember, but they don't want to admit it, probably also not to themselves, but also not to you. So stick to the now. Like the more you can stick with the now, the more valid answers you actually get. If you can in surveys, sometimes also in interviews, but in interviews you have that opportunity to kind of hear the feedback back. But if you can stick to the now, that can really, really help you. So, to sum it up, I've kind of summed them all up again because I'm now a teacher, so I need to do all the summaries. No, just kidding. No, I just thought it was handy for you to have it all on one slide. Observe, if you can, instead of asking people. Don't put people into a position where they can hide behind that bad interface, behind the murky options. And allow for that complexity in surveys when you do have to do surveys. And ask about the now. And that's it from me. If you do want to know more, obviously you can always talk to me on Twitter. What I've done is a few things that I have from external research I've put in here, in case you're interested in looking into more the choice blindness studies by the guy that I told, the Swedish researcher that I told you about. Super interesting, the work he's done. Dan O'Reilly, I absolutely love. He's done a lot of research into dishonesty. A lot of insights come from him. And Carol Tavis and Elliot Aronson wrote a really, really in-depth book about cognitive dissonance. I know this is not a super intuitive thing to get at the first time, so if you want to know more, that book is really recommended. Or, as I said, talk to me. Or ask questions via the app right now, in which case I don't know if there's any that we already have. Thank you very much. Come on up.
Yeah. Thank you, Angie. So I have the first question. What is the biggest lie a user ever told you?
The biggest one. Oh, I'd have to put them in order. The one that triggered actually doing this talk and starting to really, or not really doing this talk, but really getting into the subject was a situation where someone was telling me how when they they had to make a product decision and they had this big spreadsheet. So during the talk, during the interview, they were talking about this spreadsheet. Yeah, and they have these criteria here, and they have some weighting, and then they do this. And so I obviously asked, oh, can I see the spreadsheet? I couldn't, because there was no spreadsheet. So initially there was a bit of like, oh, I don't think I have it here, or it should be here. But before he had said that he always has everything on his laptop. Like, it was just clearly a lie. And that was kind of one of the very obvious ones, because I always believe in the good in people. So I thought, he probably has a spreadsheet somewhere. And my researcher who was with me, was taking notes afterwards. He's like, oh my God, he was just lying so obviously. So yeah, that was kind of one of the big triggers to, yeah.
Okay, thank you. For the swap faces experiments, do users just don't notice the swap, or they don't want to hurt the interviewer's feeling by telling him?
Yeah, it's definitely, so that second bit was also bit something, but they also did it with different interviewers. And also, and I think one important thing with this swapping faces is also that sometimes we just don't care enough about a decision. Now you could say, I'm in a study, I get these two faces, it doesn't matter which one I pick, it's not going to make a difference, so I'm just going to pick one and then... but you have to keep in mind, that's also how they answer some of your stuff. Like, we can't just assume that we're like the most important study in the world to them, and so that's also why this is quite important. So there's definitely a bit of both. That social desirability comes into it as well, yeah.
Okay. Do we have to ask a yes/no question to understand we have to insert nuances in our answers?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Do we have to ask a yes/no question to understand we have to insert nuances in our answers?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's that can that can work. Yeah.
When running a face-to-face user interviews, what would you recommend to avoid dealing with these lies?
So one thing that really helps is all those phrases you do at the beginning around making them feel comfortable. What I find really helps is emphasizing my own neutrality. If I wasn't involved in the product development, in the design, I always tell them, and I tell them several times. I tell them, this is not my baby. You can say whatever you want. Making them feel comfortable about this and making sure they understand this is not about them. They are not being tested. I know they're all phrases one says, but you really have to mean it. And people can feel that you mean it, or whether or not you're just reading it from a script. So yeah, and also having that neutral position even coming in to do it is obviously, sometimes it's a luxury on certain projects, but if you can go sit back and take the notes instead of asking the questions, do that. Get someone neutral in to ask the questions. It really helps.
In your experience, is there any pattern to detect the user is lying?
Yeah, no, that's actually what led me to try to put this all together, because the patterns that I find are really those human biases that are at play. So that's what I was trying to find in. I haven't seen anything. I mean, there are studies around, do people look up? Is there body signals that you can take? But none of them have been conclusive. The only conclusive study about people who lie, the facial, what happens in your body is that your face has more blood. But you'd need an infrared camera to actually do that during the interview, so it's probably a bit too much effort to find out. Yeah.
How do I connect qualitative answers of why to behavior data if people will lie?
Yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to do this. Yeah, that's they don't lie all the time. I mean, that's the happy. The good news is it doesn't happen all the time. It's just that you need to be able to spot those lies, and you need to be able to make sure that your analysis doesn't take them into like fundamental decisions. So I definitely recommend. That's why I said like, do user research. Definitely do it. This really should hopefully help you spot where you need to be careful with the analysis. It's just like when you have those participants that just blab and blab and blab. It's not like you're going to report on every single sentence that they say. It's that analysis effort that you have to make. And so in qualitative research, that's why a lot of people don't like to do it. This takes a lot longer than quantitative research. Quant, I have my bar charts afterwards. And qual, I need to go through what people actually said.
Don't you think people only tell the truth when they want to complain, even if they exaggerate?
That's actually a good question. Yeah, some people like to complain, and then they will definitely tell you the truth. But some people are also honest about good feedback. Like, I wouldn't say that, but definitely when they complain. Although when they complain, there's also a bit of embellishing and exaggerating. You know, how like the restaurant in the food was just, and the waiter was so unfriendly, even though maybe it was just one waiter that once came to the table, but the other waiter was super nice, but then the waiter was terrible. Like I think we also do it in negative things, but there's definitely a bigger incentive probably to do it when you complain.
Do you think B2C users lie more than B2B users during interviews?
No, not at all. Unfortunately, sorry about B2B product managers. Unfortunately, not. That spreadsheet that I was telling you about was a B2B study, so no. Sometimes even worse, B2B, sometimes you hardly get the person by themselves, and they have their boss sit in the interview with you. And that's when it gets really tricky, because then they want to please the boss as well. So, yeah, no, definitely not a pattern I've seen.
Do you know emerging alternatives to satisfy surveys so as to avoid NPS fatigue?
Yeah, so what I've done, but again, this is much more qualitative, although you can do it with large numbers now. There's a lot of tools now that can help you. So there's, for example, for video diary studies, which are really cool. So you can do like diary studies over a longer time. You can have up to like 100 participants and get them to, for example, take videos at certain moments in time of themselves. And it's super low friction, like you would think, oh, who would want to record a video? But the studies that have been run, it's a lot of it in the B2C space, a lot of it in the fashion space, for example, that they get like told to take a video when they are at the store and then kind of give the feedback straight away. A lot of times it's like a 30-second video or so, like something quite short, sometimes even like a 10-second clip. And so those technologies, I think, really can help with different ways of actually getting data. So with videos, I just have a bit of experience because we've run it. I know there's there's other tools where, for example, for employee surveys, there's a lot of these little pulse surveys now where you get asked one question. Instead of having to do the yearly and what is good and how is my boss, or twice a year, you actually all of a sudden get to ask a question, how do you feel today? Has anything happened today? How do you feel about your boss today? And it's answered in like 10 seconds, and those can really help. So a lot of it is really around good technology that can help you then deal with that data.
Do you study body language?
I did a bit, yes. Yeah. Because I think there's a lot around. So it actually started when you do usability tests. You know how people sometimes are like really into your prototype, and they kind of lean forward and they're like super interested, and they hold the mouse and they're like this. And then sometimes in usability tests, the participant is like, yeah, what do you want me to do? And kind of leaning back. So I kind of got into it because of that, because I noticed a huge difference in engagement. And that there's definitely also then a correlation around what type of data you get if someone's super motivated to do it. Yeah.
Any good way to measure cultural difference in the qualitative feedbacks?
To measure it? Ooh, no, I don't know. I've observed a few because I've worked in Australia and then especially in Asia. I've worked on a few things where I've noticed stuff, but no, I don't.
There's no difference?
No, I don't know how to specifically measure it. Probably needs quite a bit of data, I would assume.
And a question which relies on this one, are there lie patterns depending on nationality?
Yes. Well, not necessarily nationality. You know this difference between like there's cultural differences and then there's interpersonal differences. So like it's not always very clear cut. But I did notice bigger social desirabilities in some cultures, definitely. So that bigger kind of, especially nice lies, making something like nicer than it is, whereas, and that is kind of a bit of a difference I found between the studies I've done in Asia than the studies I've done in Europe, especially Central Europe. I find people are just brutally honest a lot of times. Yeah, it's easier. The studies I've done in the States were mainly medical devices, where it was, that was just one field where people were, I would say, a bit nicer, but then often you didn't get to the details as much. Whereas, so a bit from observation, yes, but I mean, I couldn't kind of quote a study that actually does that.
How to prevent users from being nice and not to tell the truth about your product of intentions?
I think it kind of ties into what I said earlier around emphasizing your neutrality. That really helps. Like that is really one of the biggest ones that I find gets people to kind of be a bit more, And sometimes also I do this thing where I create a bad association with something, because then people can try to actually get into that negative space in their head. So people who are just overly always positive, I try to kind of push into that negative space by deliberately either creating a bad experience or like talking about something that clearly was a bad experience. Yeah.
Should we confront the users to their lies?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, even the guy with the spreadsheet, I was so embarrassed because clearly it was kind of all coming to the open that he didn't have one. I tend to not do it. I tend to not, unless it's absolutely crucial for the study. And I think actually, my hypothesis is that Anderson and his team didn't go into why people didn't tell him whether or not they detected it or what happened there. Probably because of that, it's really tough to expose people to that behavior. Obviously, on a personal level, I do it.
And for your niece?
My niece, I do it sometimes. Actually, sometimes I love the stories, so I just go along with the stories. So she's in that. She's 7, so I can still kind of get away with it, just being like, oh my God, really? The branches came down on you? That's terrible. So, but in private, I do, but in studies, I find it really difficult.
Okay, what tools do you use to gather, analyze, and share survey results?
Usually depends on what I did the survey with. So a lot of times it's it depends on the language. So when I do an English survey, then obviously I have much more opportunity to do text analysis, also on the qual data. In a German, so I'm from Switzerland, so in German, where people sometimes even write Swiss German, I rely on other tools. And then usually it's just depending on the actual questionnaire tool that I use. I think someone from Typeform is here. They will be happy to hear that I'm quite happy with the analysis of... it depends what the tool gives. Yeah.
And one last question: it left.
Can't find it.
No, it was here. There's a bug with the application.
Maybe you just make one up. Just kidding.
No, I don't know where. Okay. Should product managers do research, or are they too involved in their product?
I think you definitely should do research. The question is, can you get someone in as a facilitator? Get someone neutral in to do the actual talking, give them a script, give them the interview guide, give them for usability testing the test tasks, and get them to interact with the customer. But you should definitely be very, very heavily involved, and also you watching them, really. And as I said, taking notes. I mean, my favorite job in usability tests is taking notes, because then I get to see everything and kind of. But yeah, definitely. But as I said, that whole neutrality thing it can be trained though. If you can get used to it, as long as you can kind of make sure, because people are going to insult your baby. It's really tough. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Angie.
Thank you. Thanks very much.